Welcome to Inside Badger Nation on Madison CW. Now your hosts, Ben Wargle and Phil Dawson.
Welcome into Inside Badger Nation. Phil Dawson from the Big 1070 here in Madison, joined by Mr. Ben Wargle, BadgerNation.com, the editor and publisher. And welcome into another program that's a big one for you as we have so much going on in all of the Badger entities, including recapping what happened in Minnesota, keeping a hold of Paul Bunyan's axe, Badger basketball recap for you as they are on a roll, plus recruiting update, including a brand new commit for Wisconsin, and we'll take a look back at some of those WIAA state championship games, which had some Badger recruits in there as well. But we do start, Ben, with keeping that axe, a decade of dominance, if you will, as the Badgers beat up on Minnesota. Maybe could have had a bigger score in this one. You know, they win 20-7. Had some of the passing game, had some of the conversions on third downs, worked out the way they had planned. But no matter how you look at it, it's a win over a BCS-ranked team, really helping the Badgers this season. And, of course, that decade of dominance, keeping Paul Bunyan's axe in the locker room for the Wisconsin Badgers.
Yeah, the fourth coldest game in school history for Wisconsin. So it kind of made it kind of tough sledding a little bit for the Badgers offensively. I mean, you look at the passing game, just really did not kind of catch pace in the first half. Just 44 passing yards. Joel Stave had a pick-6 interception, which was actually the only touchdown Minnesota scored in the game. But Wisconsin's offense to begin the second half, Stave was key. 6 for 6 for 68 yards and a touchdown to make it 20-7, the final score. And you could tell at the time that Minnesota just was not generating anything offensively. They were held to under 200 total yards. Wisconsin with 3 forced fumbles in this game. Nate Hammond there with the first one. The first time all season Wisconsin's defense had forced 3 turnovers in a game, and that was key. In a game where points were at a premium, Minnesota just could not get anything going. This was another big play, too, by Brendan Kelly. Borland actually hit Philip Nelson, the quarterback, on the heel, resulting in Brendan Kelly being able to close the distance there and to make that strip and that sack. And just a big game all around for Wisconsin. Not the prettiest game, but like you mentioned, Phil, they moved up 4 spots in the BCS to number 15 because they beat a Minnesota team 8-2 overall coming into the game and number 25 in the BCS. Big win for Wisconsin.
No doubt about it. And we talk about that defense too, and you mentioned Hammond, but Hammond as well as Tanner McAvoy, these are 2 guys who have transitioned to defensive players, and it's another phenomenal performance by Dave Aranda, getting his group ready and having his guys in the correct positions to make plays, and they did that. And like you said, they didn't allow a touchdown. That's the 3rd Big Ten team that hasn't scored on this Badger defense. Very, very impressive.
Wisconsin's just playing outstanding from a defensive perspective. I don't know how you could look at it any other way. I mean, Chris Borland, look at that. I mean, animal, strips the ball carrier and then recovers his own fumble, and he was probably the biggest partier after the game. Got a dry erase board and wrote down 10 straight and paraded around with Soldier and Shelton on his shoulders with a piggyback ride. And just one of those games where Wisconsin's defense continues to show why they are one of the best units in the country. And Dave Aranda deserves a lot of credit, and these players deserve a lot of credit. I mean, there's a lot of seniors on this team, 26 of them, and a lot of them are on the defensive end. And for them to go from a 4-3 where they've been ingrained for 3 or 4 years and all of a sudden change to a 3-4 defense and to have the kind of season they're having, just maybe not as many turnovers as they would like, but just pure dominance on their schedule. It really is a thing of beauty.
Also, too, Borland with the forced fumble, I believe, matching the all-time NCAA record with 14 forced fumbles as a defender. Gary Anderson obviously very pleased after this one as well, keeping that axe a big deal for Anderson and these Badgers.
It was another great victory for us without question. The kids played hard in all 3 areas again, and you go back and look at the tape, and that was 2 football teams that game obviously means a lot to them, and they played at a high level. It was cold, all the weather, everything else that's out there, but if you watch the game, not knowing what the situation was, the weather, you would look at it and say those are 2 teams that laid it all on the line, and that's exactly what happened, and we played obviously well enough to win the game, so I was proud of that.
So again, as we said, with the win, a very impressive one at that, the Badgers, again, right on the cusp of being in that BCS at the end of the season. We'll find out what they can do. Again, a win over Penn State. Where does that put them? And, of course, what happens in the Big Ten championship game if Michigan State either pulls off a win over Ohio State, or Ohio State does complete the perfect season by going there and beating Michigan State. So this Penn State team, Ben, what do they bring? What should we be aware of as the Badgers and the Nittany Lions are getting ready to square off?
Well, this Penn State team is entirely different from what we saw last season. I mean, now you're really seeing the scholarship reduction start to take effect with the depth on this team. Penn State has been alternating wins since September, and they've really struggled from an offensive end. They haven't scored a ton of points at times, and defensively they've allowed over 40 points 3 times, including a big 60-plus number to Ohio State on the road in Columbus. So, Wisconsin's favored at about 24 points going into this game. I fully expect Wisconsin to win this game because you look at Penn State, you look at their numbers statistically, they are a much different team home and away. I mean, home, you're playing in front of 110,000 fans with a true freshman quarterback. Away, they really look like a unit that's still kind of reeling a little bit from the amount of players they lost last year, an emotional year, and especially the lack of scholarships, lack of depth they have at some positions.
And you know that Bill O'Brien is a very, very good coach, so it should be a fun matchup. We'll see if the Badgers can finish on a 7-game win streak. We're going to hit the hardwood next, talk some Badger hoops as they continue to roll next on IBN. Welcome back into IBN. Phil and Ben with you. Touchdown football. Now we got to hit the hardwood because the Badger men's basketball team continues to roll. Now, as of this taping, had set a record for 7-0 start, which is the best under head coach Bo Ryan. It goes back to last week when the Badgers had 3 games in 5 days, starting with North Dakota. Then they took on Bowling Green and then finished with Oral Roberts. And as we take a look at some of those games, Ben, one thing stood out to me, that they still weren't playing the kind of defense that's going to be needed year long once they hit the Big Ten season, and certainly once they hit the NCAA tournament. But the offense is there. The depth is there. So many different players that can score. Frank Kaminsky had a huge week, as you can see, against Bowling Green. He was actually named the Big Ten Player of the Week. And again, against Oral Roberts, finishing with 21 points. Had he not scored the 43 earlier in the week, the 21 would have been a career high. And they were tested too, but got away despite Oral Roberts shooting 55% from the field and 53% from behind the arc.
Well, Phil, I think you look at the Bowling Green game, you have 6 players in double figures. Look at the Oral Roberts game, you have 5 players in double figures. And while this team continues to kind of evolve defensively, you have a team that has a lot of guys that can put the ball in the hoop. And Bo Ryan has always kind of joked. He says, as long as we score 1 more point than the other team, that's good enough for me. And you look at kind of defensively, this team, it continues to grow. I mean, you lose 5 seniors off last year's team, and you have Josh Gosser back, who looks very confident offensively, which you see here. Douye Dukan back. And then, of course, Sam Decker is starting to kind of evolve defensively, but he's still got the ups, as we've seen. Frank Kaminsky, too, he's going to be the main post player for Wisconsin this year. And you look at his scoring, take out the 43-point game, you mentioned it, a big game against Oral Roberts, a game Wisconsin needed him to have in order to win that game. I mean, Oral Roberts is picked to finish 2nd in the Southland, and they're playing without their star player, but yet sometimes that kind of helps teams rally around each other and not really rely on one player, makes them more balanced. I mean, we saw that at times a couple years ago with Wisconsin, with a Josh Gosser going out or a John Lure going out for extended time. Kind of makes them a little bit more versatile, a little bit more dynamic. And, defensively, we're going to talk about that in a second, but offensively, Wisconsin right now clicking in all cylinders, and that's obviously a very strong start for the Badgers, especially after last year when they really struggled for long periods of time putting the ball in the hoop.
Yeah, and part of that, I think, too, and you're watching it here in the highlights, the way they attack the basket. And this continued Bowling Green, it continued with Oral Roberts, and then it continued with St. Louis down in Cancun as they opened up that tournament with the win over the Billikens. And then there was that matching piece to it. The defense really kind of shined a bit as they were able to hold St. Louis to under 35% shooting, 33% from the field, and less than 30% from behind the arc. And, of course, they still have this offense. So they end up winning 63-57, but the storyline in this one, the defense, and, of course, the free throws. Now, they missed a lot, 17 of 30 from the line in this one, but that's 17 that they made, the exact same number that St. Louis attempted in that game, and that's exactly what Bo Ryan, this coaching staff, is looking for. They're a team that this is one of their calling cards. They're going to make as many free throws as another team attempts.
Yeah, I think St. Louis attempted 19 more shots in this game too, and still shot under 35%. And we both of us, Phil, in different ways, thought that Wisconsin was going to lose this game. Just not because we both thought that St. Louis was that much better. They are. I mean, they're a much better team than Wisconsin faced last week. But just the amount of games Wisconsin's played, 3 games in 5 days last week, and then you have a tough day of travel. You bust down to Chicago, you fly to Cancun, you have an off day Monday, then you're playing against a team that's many people think is going to contend in the A-10 with a lot of players back. So you just thought eventually it's going to catch up with them. But this team continues to kind of surprise us a little bit, and they surprise us by their best defensive effort of the season. Evans, St. Louis's best player, hit his average, but really Wisconsin made him work all game long. Yeah. And Trayvon Jackson is a guy that we've talked about as being a clutch player for Wisconsin. Well, led him with 16 points, made I think 8 of his points in the last 3+ minutes, and the big key for Wisconsin was him defensively. Made a big steal with less than a minute to go, and then made his 2 free throws to ice the game. And Wisconsin continues to evolve, as we mentioned, and now the defense especially is starting to catch up with the offense. And when that happens, when the defense gets up to the level the offense is playing at, this team is going to be very, very hard to beat by anybody remaining on their schedule.
Yeah, and again, it's not just because last year, let's say they had opportunities. If they were hitting their threes, they could beat anybody. This team attacks the rim. Josh Gosser, Ben Brust, Douye Dukin even in that game. And that's another reason why that they are having such success offensively, because it can open everything up for them. And the other thing about this is that you mentioned the 6 players in double figures, the 5 players in double figures. While only 2 got into double figures against St. Louis, you had a slew of others that were right on the cusp. And that's without Ben Brust. Had of his worst game of the year, was 1 of 8 from the field, but they still were able to get the victory. They still were able to have other people step in, other players step up, step in, get points for this team. They got some firepower.
Yeah, I think Douye Dukan provided the big lift of the game. Only played 10 minutes, but went 3 for 3 from the field, 7 points. Got a big offensive rebound and put back at the buzzer that gave Wisconsin an 8-point lead going to halftime. Greg Gard said, he may have played 10 minutes, but what he gave us was well worth more than the time he was on the court. And that's what Wisconsin needs. I mean, with George Marshall still out, you need the guys on the bench to step up. Nigel Hayes, 7 points off the bench. Dukan and Bronson Koenig, another productive game. This Wisconsin team, as we've seen, continues to grow, and they continue to get big resume-building wins.
And a lot of fun to watch, too. Also fun to watch. How about some recruiting? We'll tell you about a brand new Badger commit and head to Camp Randall after this on IBN. Welcome back into Inside Badger Nation. Phil and Ben with you, and it's time to talk a little recruiting. We do it better than anyone else on TV, on CW especially. Ben does it better than I do, but we got a lot of good stuff for you today, including a brand new commit out of Florida, a wide receiver by the name of Natrell Jamerson. 6 foot, 175. He's a wideout, like we said, Ben, but something's missing on here.
4.3 40-yard dash speed, and that's the key, Phil. I mean, wide receiver and speed, 2 things Wisconsin desperately wants to add in this recruiting class and going forward under Gary Anderson. And after Jamerson didn't really accept, didn't get many big verbal offers from BCS schools, and when Wisconsin came through in October, obviously became very excited about the opportunity to play in the Big Ten. He came for Wisconsin's game against Indiana on the 16th, took an official visit, and then committed just a couple days after. Jamerson's team finished the season with a losing record, but still was one of the top players in the county. Finished as the top individual scorer in the county with 17 touchdowns for 102 points. Led the county in receptions with 68, almost 1,200 receiving yards, 14 receiving touchdowns. That total was the second most receiving yards. The guy with the second most receiving yards behind Jamerson was 555 yards behind. So without question, dominated a very good prep area in Florida. And his coach says Jamerson's got tremendous work ethic. He's going to be an asset to Wisconsin. He calls him a polished wide receiver. Also can return kicks and punts, which will be key with Jared Abrederis graduating after this season. Jamerson is expected to start at the Z receiver for Wisconsin. And the other key thing for this too, Phil, is that this is the 4th verbal commit Wisconsin has received from the state of Florida. And there's a lot of talent in that area, a lot of speed, and to get a guy like Jamerson, who really went under the radar by a lot of schools, that's going to be key for the Badgers moving forward. Is can you continue to go into areas that have a lot of really talented high school receivers and high school prospects for that matter, and pluck those guys that maybe just fall between the cracks a little bit. Florida State, and Miami really dominate the state. They can't take everybody. So the key for Wisconsin is to take the kids that maybe are good enough to play at that level, but just simply the Gators and the Hurricanes and the Seminoles don't have room for. And Jamerson is is one of those guys who could really step in next year and probably be an impact player in some spot.
And it's also been a long-term recruiting plan here at the University of Wisconsin. You got to go outside of the state's borders to find some of the skilled players, unless they're coming in as walk-ons, right? But one thing that they do well here in the state of Wisconsin, well, we saw it at the WIAA state tournament, right? Some of the big boys. And now we take a look back at that, including Heartland Arrowhead had a couple that we had a chance to see, including Billy Hirschfeld. Why don't you tell us about him, Ben? We, of course, take a look at him a couple of different times on the program, but got up close and personal with them at Camp Randall.
Yeah, Billy Hirschfeld, you look at last year's state championship game when they beat Sun Prairie, really didn't do a lot, just did not have a really solid game, and so this year certainly was a factor. 4 tackles, 3 solo tackles, and a tackle for loss. Really pressured Sean McGuire, Franklin's quarterback who's going to Western Illinois. McGuire had a good day, but really just, you just never saw him get into a rhythm in the second half as soon as Hirschfeld and Wisconsin's the Heartland Arrowhead defense started putting the pressure on him. And Hirschfeld, I can see him playing a defensive end, maybe an outside linebacker. Very, very talented prospect who's going to really thrive in the 3-4 defense.
And he's got a teammate as well that we're all very high on, and the name is legendary with the University of Wisconsin, George Panos. He was there. You saw him, Ben, Arrowhead champions, and he's a big boy.
Yeah, Arrowhead just dominated the nightcap of the state tournament, and you looked at the balance that the Warhawks had: 235 yards passing, 230 yards rushing. Really just saw this team take over. And now Panos was just dominant in some of these highlights, and you can see him at the guard position, number 77, second in there, right there, going back. I mean, he didn't have to do much at some points, but when he did, just physically just pushes guys out of the way. And you just like the way this guy has developed. I mean, he's gotten stronger. He's gotten mentally better. You see him get to the second level of blocking a little bit better. Takes after his dad a little bit with just the work ethic. I mean, there, perfect.
Ooh.
Look at. I mean, that's just what you want out of an offensive lineman. Quick eye your snap. Really just bursting out, looking around. You want to seal off your guy to create a pocket for your quarterback to make plays. And Arrowhead's quarterback made a ton of plays. That's a big reason why Heartland Arrowhead won this game. The pressure, the non-pressure from Franklin's front 4, front 7, because of the dominance by Arrowhead's offensive line.
Meanwhile, another offensive lineman we're all very high on. He's been on this program, Jaden Galt, and that game from Winona Grove as they held up a gold football. Wow, an unbelievable comeback. Jaden Galt goes out a winner.
Trailing 17-0 to the third quarter, the Silver Eagles scored the final 21 points, including a 1-yard plunge with 53 seconds left. Not surprising, that plunge was run right behind Jaden Galt. Mm-hmm. And the game just started a little auspiciously from Winona Grove. I mean, Greendale drove inside the Greendale 35 times in the game, but only came away with no points after being stopped 4 times on 4th down and 1 fumble inside the 20. But Galt in Winona Grove, 425 yards of total offense, rushed for 208, passed for 217 and 2 touchdowns. Just another impressive performance. And at the left tackle spot, just really was kind of dominant in this game, just kind of like he's been all season long to lead Winona Grove to a state title. It hasn't happened at that program in a long time, and just goes to show that Heartland Arrowhead and Winona Grove finished, they won back-to-back state championships last year, Winona Grove this past year. Just a really solid performance.
Well, we have a lot of more recruiting to get to here in just a little bit. We'll have our email of the week and touch on some other recruits as well, so stick around. We have more coming up right here on Inside Badger Nation. We always invite you to check out our YouTube channel, see some past episodes of Inside Badger Nation, see what we said, and then see if it came true. It usually does. Just search Inside Badger Nation. Twitter @InBadgerNation. You can find us as well. Keep you up to date on the recruiting, and email us InsideBadgerNation@gmail.com, because each week we do this. It's our email of the week, and it's presented by 608 Restaurant and Bar, 212 State Street, 608. More than just an area code. All right, our question of the week comes from Billy in Madison. He says, talk a little bit about this weekend's recruits, and is it actually bigger than the Northwestern weekend? Well, Ben, kind of have to give you this question. We could bring up our big board because we have a couple of players that we anticipate being here this weekend. Final home weekend for the Badgers, and looks like quite a bit of players, some that we have highlighted on this program.
Yeah, I mean, it is a big recruiting weekend. I don't know if it's bigger than the Northwestern weekend, which had a number of 5-star kids, a number of 4-star kids on campus. Certainly bigger in terms of the sheer volume of players coming in. Raymond Miner is a kid who is very talented and an outside linebacker, even though he's listed as a tight end here, an outside linebacker from the Virginia area, a guy who certainly Wisconsin needs in this class, a guy who could play really well in the 3-4. Darian Watkins, who we're going to talk about a little bit more in a minute, very talented wide receiver. T. Shepard, who talked about on this show, a 4-star cornerback, defensive back in the Mississippi area. And you look at Colton Miller, offensive lineman. Wisconsin offered him a couple months back. And a guy that Wisconsin needs in this class just because of what we talked about with the sheer numbers on the offensive line. Wisconsin wants to add guys in this class to get closer to that 15 scholarship maximum. And, Taiwan Deal, Chris Jones, and Joe Keels all commits. Serge Trenzi, a very talented junior college linebacker from Eastern Arizona Community College. So a number of kind of a diverse grouping coming in this weekend, and a number of talented kids. And Wisconsin's hoping to get a couple of these guys to commit. I think Darian Watkins probably is the most likely to commit out of this group. Colton Miller is a guy who's kind of tough to read, but a guy that's going to come out here and experience Wisconsin and see that there's an opportunity for him to come in and play right away. It'll be cold, but it won't be as cold as it was up in Minnesota certainly last weekend too. So it certainly is going to be a good group of kids coming in this weekend, and we might see a couple official visitors commit to the Wisconsin Badgers after this weekend.
Meanwhile, we do this every single week as well. He was on that big board, but our IBN's most wanted this week, there he is, Darian Watkins, a DB wide receiver. Looks like a big-time athlete, right?
A good-sized athlete who has played several positions. Look at this past season, over 1,200 rushing yards, just under 1,500 passing yards, 18 touchdowns each rushing and passing, and many schools projecting to be a wide receiver at the next level. So, his transition to receiver, he has that ideal build and shows a good open field ability as a quarterback here, mostly wide receiver clips. He's played a little bit of wide receiver throughout parts of his career and certainly in camps, and he has shown good ability to catch the ball, as you'll see here, especially on deep routes, which is key for Wisconsin in their play-action passing game. Strong kid who can break tackles, is tough, competitive. It just needs time to learn and adjust his position. Like I said, at Galen High School, he does so many different things, with running the ball and quarterback and different things like that. This guy was originally committed to Northwestern for a long period of time, and it wasn't so much that Northwestern was struggling, it's just that Watkins wanted to kind of look at other schools. He actually visited Wisconsin for their last home game against Indiana with his stepbrother, Carriel Davison, a 2015 kid. And Pat Fitzgerald has a strong policy. Once you commit to a school, you don't take visits anywhere else, official or unofficial. Ooh. And Watkins apparently was told by Fitzgerald, you have one chance to recommit to Northwestern. We'll give you a chance to say you're firm, you're not going to take any more visits. And Watkins didn't want to do that. He wanted to look around. Obviously, Northwestern's struggling this year. They're not going to make it into a bowl game. And so the two schools kind of, parted ways. Kind of a tough blow for Northwestern, sticking to their policy when Watkins is probably your best kid in your recruiting class. And that's to Wisconsin's gain. You need wide receivers. You need a talented kid. And Darian Watkins, I fully expect Darian Watkins to be a part of this recruiting class, whether it's this weekend or further down the road. But Wisconsin, Chris Beatty's been handling his recruitment. Great chance to make an impact player here. Get an impact player for next season.
All right, we'll see if he's a Badger coming up in the next few weeks. We'll also see how the Badgers perform and if they're headed to the BCS anytime soon. That's next time when we see you right here on Inside Badger Nation. Happy Thanksgiving.